Now to introduce our speakers today. So Andy Paul is the host of the top-rated sales podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul. There's more than 1,100 episodes to date. And, if you go back, you'll see that Jordana shows up in a couple of those podcasts. So definitely.
Does indeed.
And Andy's podcast is the go-to resource for sales leaders and top sales producers. So he's also the author of the Amazon best-selling book, Sell Without Selling Out, which is the copy that 50 lucky participants will receive. And the author of 2 other Amazon best-selling books, so Amp Up Your Sales and Zero Time Selling. He's the founder of Zero Time Selling, which is a sales advisory firm. But before starting that company in 2000, Andy had a very successful sales career in tech startups where he sold over $600 million, oh, don't we all wish, of complex systems and services to some of the world's largest enterprises. We also have Jordana Zeldin with us today, and she's a sales coach and co-founder of the Practice Lab, which is the first sales training company that helps sellers and sales teams develop their skills in the same way that athletes and musicians do. And that's through deep and deliberate practice. And I feel that deeply because we aim to do the same thing at Bongo. So she's formerly a top performing account exec, and she's been in sales for nearly a decade and continues to be humbled and amazed by how powerful practice can be for developing confidence, culture, and the skills that make for the best selling and the best human beings. And again, feel that very deeply on the Bongo side because we're all about developing skills, developing confidence. And I'm Emily McClellan. I'm the VP of Growth and Customer Success at Bongo. And what we are at Bongo is we're a sales readiness tool that provides training and real-time feedback that reinforces a lot of the winning behaviors that we'll be talking about today. And so we provide a variety of workflows that enable your sales teams to validate their skills and practice not only their knowledge, but those essential human skills in a safe and judgment-free zone. All right, so with that all out of the way, let's get started. So Andy, for any of our listeners today who aren't familiar with your book, Sell Without Selling Out, take a moment to maybe describe what the 4 pillars of selling in are and the impact.
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that nice introduction. Yeah, I mean, in the book, I frame that there's sort of 2 basic modes that sellers operate in. One is called selling out, one selling in. Selling out is the traditional pushy salesy behaviors that buyers really dislike. We all are familiar with those. We're all generally accused of acting that way by buyers, whether we do or not. The going in assumption on the part of buyers is that we're that way. And what I want to do is draw what the opposite of that was and show that really the way to success in B2B sales and sales in general, even life in general, is based on leaning into these innate human attributes. And so for me, and it certainly was true throughout my career, is I think it's even more true today, is that when customers get to the point of making a decision, and there's research that backs this up, is that buyers, the number one factor they're taking into account in making the decision is their experience with the seller, right? That individual seller. So you as the seller have the opportunity to become the real differentiator in the mind of the buyer, because there's a certain assumption there that products are largely interchangeable. And so, I spell out 4 pillars of selling in: connection, curiosity, understanding, and generosity, as being just the foundations for being able to create these buying experiences that lead buyers to want to do business with you.
That's great. That's great. And then, I mean, how do you translate those 4 pillars into what we think of as traditional sales enablement right now and training, which, to me is oftentimes focused on knowing your product, right? And that's very important.
Well, I think that is the huge gap and huge opportunity that exists for improvement within sales, is that I like to say, there's 2 parts to a salesperson. There's what you know, and there's who you are. And we spend the bulk of our time trying to train our people in the part of what they know, right? And in fact, probably too much. and not enough time focusing on who they are as humans and how they're perceived and received by the buyers they're working with. And so, yeah, I think the opportunity that exists, and certainly Jordana's addressing it, you're addressing it through Bongo, is okay, great. Everybody knows about the products. Everybody knows about the services. Everybody sort of, shares these prepackaged insights. And how do you create this differentiated buying experience that inspires the buyer to want to do business with you? And it starts with how you connect with them as a human, how you build your credibility and trust. And when you've built a level of trust, then you can start deploying your curiosity because you've earned the right to the answers that you need to enable to dig down deep. And then you need to go beyond that to this level of understanding. And this is, again, I think one of the shortfalls in our training is we teach sellers to go out and sort of gather information, but we don't teach the importance to make sure they understand the context of this information, why it's so important to the buyer. And then finally is, once you have that understanding, is use your generosity to help the buyer to quickly gather the information they need to make an informed decision with the least investment of their time and resources possible. If you can do that, then you create the buying experiences buyers want.
It sounds easy, right? But I think there's probably a lot,
yes,
lot more to it than just
simple, but not easy.
Right. And so how do we sort of, I guess, flip the idea of what traditional enablement is right now, which is, okay, what's your value prop? What's your product? What are your features, benefits, all of those things,
Sure.
Which, like you said, X, Y, and Z company are doing the same exact thing, right? How do you differentiate yourself?
It starts with a mindset shift. Fundamentally is and I've done this, like when I speak to groups in public or work with companies, I'll ask sellers, okay, show of hands, what's your job as a seller, right? And I'll give them a couple of examples to choose from, but typically if you ask most salespeople, they think their job is to go out and persuade somebody to buy their product. And when you have that mindset that your job is about persuading somebody to buy your product, it becomes very black or white. Do you really need to understand the buyer? Because it's almost immaterial, because my job is to persuade you to buy it, whether I understand you or not. And so I write about in the book is this mindset shift, which is that as a seller, you need to understand that your job is to listen to your buyer, understand the things that are most important to them in terms of the challenges they face and the outcomes they want to achieve, and then help them get that. So one is, hey, I'm here, pitching my product. Others, I'm here to help you, right? Sincerely here to help you, here to understand. I'm here to listen. I'm here to make you feel understood and valued. And, this human-centered approach, it's not, this is not some ethereal thing. This is blocking and tackling that works way better than the alternative.
And I think, so much of what you talk about is, being your authentic self, right? Because people are going to see way through the phoniness and,
Yep.
I'm going to sell differently than Jordana will, than you will. And so how do you practice those skills then? If you're not following a script, right? Or if you're not really supposed to be doing what your colleague next to you is supposed to be doing, how do we practice those skills?
Well, let Jordana deal with some of the practice, but at the heart of learning how to sell is experimentation. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great American writer, said, all life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better. And to the point you just made is we all sell in unique ways. And as leaders, you need to learn how to support that individuality to enable people to become the best version of themselves in a sales context. And that's necessarily going to be different than the person next to them. And unless you're a sales frontline manager with 20 direct reports where there are too many to handle, you've got a reasonable number of direct reports. That's your job. Your job is to, I said, if your job as a seller is to listen to understand what's most important to your buyer and help them get that, your job as a frontline manager is to listen to your sellers, understand the things that are most important to them in terms of the objectives they're trying to achieve in their career and in life, and then help them get that. Then you'll spend that time to help them become the best version of themselves. And that entails, letting them be free to experiment and find the paths that best align with their strengths, with their unique strengths, with their unique character, their unique values. And so they can bring their own, or their authentic selves, excuse me, to bear in dealing with the buyer. I mean, I was a non-traditional salesperson, very introverted sort coming out of school. I mean, I had no idea what I was going to do, so I went into sales. It was a tough transition, but I knew very early on that I couldn't act the way that I was being trained to act, right? The hunter, or the super aggressive, extroverted. I was, an introverted problem solver. And I was fortunate I had a boss that's, enabled me and encouraged me to sort of follow my own path. And there were other times I had bosses that didn't encourage it, but as I talk about in the book, you have to take responsibility for your own career. And I did. I said, look, I have a better way, I think, to make this happen. You're going to have to give me a little bit of rope, and I'll deliver, right? If I don't deliver, fine, get rid of me. I think there's a better way to do it, and I'll deliver. And this is the approach that sellers have to take. You have to take this responsibility for your career, because no one's going to care about your success as much as you do. And if you have a vision of how you think you should best sell, then you need to follow that.
I also think too, I was just going to say, like, one of the challenges that I often find enablers even share with me that they have is, they know that their sellers need to be more curious, or they know that they need to be better discoverers, or they know that they need to make their prospects feel more seen, heard, and understood. But tying those big, really important fundamental human concepts down to behaviors, actual things sellers can grow awareness of and practice in service of being more effective can be really, really challenging. So I think for enablement teams who agree with Andy and us that, like, yes, these human fundamentals are at the core of great selling, then it's about identifying, well, like, if we're wanting to make our buyer feel like we're deeply interested in them, what are the skills, the specific practicable skills that will allow us to do that? Or if we're wanting to create a shift in our mindset of selling being like a big take, where we're like taking information, taking their money, right? Like taking their time and turning it into a give, how do we help sellers to identify how to more effectively get into that mindset in advance of their sales calls, and practice that so they can tap into that at the ready, because they've made that connection. Like, it feels like this to be authentically curious. I'm going to take this spirit, that connection that I'm so familiar with in my life because I'm a curious person, and bring that right into the sales conversation. And something as simple as practicing tapping into your curiosity, even outside of the context of a sales role play, literally in the context of a real conversation, and then making it your goal to bring that curiosity that you've tapped into your selling interactions, can change everything.
Well,
because go ahead, Andy.
Well, I was gonna say, you raised such a good point, is that you're the same in life as you are in sales, or
it's really important.
You're the same in sales as you are in life. And if you think you're assuming an act, or you're playing a role like a character on stage, then that's problematic. And so, I said before, is, your job as a seller is to listen to your buyer, to understand things are most important to them, then help them get that. Well, what's your job vis-a-vis a colleague at work? Somebody you're trying to work with. Well, your job is to listen to them, understand the things that are most important to them, and then help them get that. What do you do with your partner or spouse in life? You want to listen, you have a good relationship. You want to listen to them, understand things that are most important to them, help them get them. I mean, it's things you want to practice in sales to be really effective in sales are the same things you want to practice in life. So curiosity is a great example, right? Is if you're trying to form relationships with people outside of work, how do you make yourself interesting to them? Be interested in them first, right?
And it's the difference between, oh, sorry, go ahead, Andy.
No, you go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, and it's the difference, when we think about something like discovery, that moment, though, of course, it shouldn't be a moment, it should be happening at every moment in the conversation. But, where we are asking our prospects questions, we can either follow a checklist of predetermined questions, which our buyers can feel lack curiosity, or we can take a beat to connect with our curiosity, maybe having primed the well through some practice. And just by way of being curious, the texture of our questions will be better, deeper, more interesting. And when somebody feels listened to, or when somebody feels like the subject of someone else's curiosity, it's powerful what that can do for resistance and openness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the challenge for sellers, as you described, is not to focus on discovery, but is, one of the huge trends in sales, which is, not coincidentally sort of aligned with the use of more technology in sales, is that we become more rigid in selling. We become more process oriented, more compliance oriented. And when you're in those moments, as Jordana described, when you're talking to a prospect, you're asking questions, they can feel that rigidity, right? I've listened to so many recorded phone calls with sellers where the buyer's basically asking them to ask a different question, to head down a certain path. And the seller's so glued to the script that they don't recognize the opportunity.
Right.
And that, again, sort of just speaks to this idea, is that we need to help our sellers understand that, follow a path, right? Follow your instincts, follow good human behavior, as opposed to just follow those list of 10 questions you've got written down.
And I think just going back to the practice, because it's so important, it's kind of the basis of, what you do, Jordana, what we do at Bongo is, what is the best way to facilitate that? Is it through, role playing with your manager, role playing with your peers, like role playing with strangers? What is the best way, you think, to facilitate that true kind of authentic, off the cuff, what might happen in a real environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's interesting how practice and role play are often considered to be one and the same. We think of them as a little distinct, and even advise approaching role play a little bit differently than the status quo. But what we've found is that for these soft, like hard to pin down skills like curiosity, like listening, we found it really effective to take sellers in paired practice outside of the context of having to be anybody but who they are, and into a real conversation with another human being. And in our listening lab, as an example, where we take sellers through an exercise that we worked up with an amazing kind of like scholar of listening by the name of Chris Williams, what we invite sellers to do is move through 4 different levels of listening, from the very distracted, and we've all been like victims of that kind of listening, all the way up through the kind of deeper and more focused level of listening. And what that helps people to do is not only develop their own awareness of each stage of listening, they also develop awareness of the phases stages they usually find themselves in. And oftentimes people will admit, I'm usually level 2 listening to most people, or sometimes I'm level 1 listening to my prospect, right? But it also gives the practice partner the experience of being listened to at each of those levels. And when you are the victim of level 1 listening, where you feel like you're not paid attention to, the walls go up and you're much less likely to disclose and open up. And of course, as sellers, we really need and want and hope that our prospects are going to open up. Now, for kind of harder skills, I guess, around like formulating certain types of questions or frameworks for moving through objection handling, we do advise that sellers move into a kind of role play scenario, but the expectations of what that role play is should be doing are a little different than how a typical sales team handles role play. Because typically on a sales team, let's say you're role playing objection handling or whatever with a partner, your partner is there to give you like the toughest objection, and you're there like as quickly as possible to say the smoothest and best answer that you can, to show your teammates how well you know it and to prove to your sales leader how good you are. But if you think about what true practice is for someone like a musician or an athlete, the first thing is it's not happening at game speed at all. It's really, really, really slowed down. In service of what? In service of making mistakes, right? Noticing your errors, doubling back, making corrections, growing new awarenesses, forming new, even neurological grooves, so that when it's time to speed things up, you've developed awareness and had your at-bat so you can make different choices in the moment. So, in summary, I'll say that role play can be really effective for the kind of more, in some ways, repeatable moments, I think, in a sales conversation, but slowing it down is where sellers really gain the benefits of the awareness that can come with slowness, so that it can better. So what they've learned and what they've become aware of is at the ready for them in their real sales conversation.
Yeah, trouble with role play oftentimes it has a preordained outcome, right? So everybody's sort of working.
Well, that too.
Jordana's point, right? Is so yeah, people throwing in the tough objections and so on. It just, yeah, there's some value to it. I'm not as big a fan of that and I know people sort of shudder sometimes when I say this, is, you have to experiment. And oftentimes that you are practicing on your customers. And that's, not that we should be practicing, as Jordana talked about, but also not be afraid to practice with your customers and experiment, try different things. And you may find some things don't work. You may not win a deal because of it. Oh, well, you're going to take that learning and apply it going forward. I mean, we can't shield ourselves from the consequences of learning. And there are consequences of learning, right? We don't know the answers at all time. We don't know the best questions to ask. But I like to say is if you ask my influences in my career in terms of where I learned how to sell, my customers taught me how to sell. And so if you go and pay attention, that is a valuable form of practice in and of itself. But to the point Jordana, and I just love what she was talking about there, is we do more of what she's talking about. We get people into real life situations as opposed to just trying to throw knowledge at people. And we've got enough knowledge-based training with our sellers. I mean, you need to learn your product, you need to keep, perfecting your knowledge. But there's research out there. There's a gentleman in Australia runs a consulting company that's done thousands of win-loss analyses, interviews, not surveys, interviews with clients around the world. And they summarize their findings of why people buy or why they don't buy into sort of 9 reasons why you win and 9 reasons why you lose. And when you look at the reasons, none of them have to do with the product. None of them have to do with pricing. None of them have to do with functionality. It has to do with almost exclusively with the buyer's experience in their buying journey with the seller.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about different scenarios and really working with peers or just other people who can really sort of try and replicate what may or may not happen. I know there's a place for role play, a place for not, but I think that's where technology can help too, just in terms of scaling that experience. Andy, you were talking a little bit in the beginning about the role of a manager, right? And your role as a manager is to coach, and you should be finding the time to help and foster
Yes.
Yeah. And
I mean, if you're a frontline manager, you're not coaching. I would ask the question, what are you doing?
Right. Right.
I mean, sure, you've got some hiring and capacity building and so on, but fundamentally, your job is to help develop the skills of the people that are working for you. And that's your path to success as a manager. So trying to find the best available resources to help people become not your idea as a manager of what they should be, right? And tied to the certain set of activity metrics and so on and so forth. Not that metrics are unimportant, but the fact is that, your job is to help people grow and develop. And, I think it's one of the shortcomings that exists, certainly in the way that we try to onboard people in general these days, is we've got these very rigid constraints. We want people to, onboard in X period of time, and without any data that really says that in the long term, that turns out people that are more successful over 2, 3, 4, 5 years in their career.
Yeah, and I think it's I also love what you said about, you could practice as much as you want, but you have to really experiment in the wild too, right? Like experiment with your customers. And so the nice thing again about technology and Bongo in particular is you can do both, right? So we have a way to to have kind of asynchronous preloaded questions. What would you do on the spot, right? So how would you respond here? But there's also group experience, right? Like let's get in a lab with your peers or with your manager and have real conversations and have those be recorded and have your manager watch that and give you feedback. So really there's a lot of value to having it kind of archived and a place where you yourself can go back and reflect on your own.
Absolutely.
your managers can, your peers can. And so, there's absolutely the place to practice there. But what a lot of people do is also upload actual sales calls, right? And all right, let's talk about what you did at 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Were you actively listening, or were you following down that path
Right.
of what you thought was the right thing to say? And so I think technology can really help you learn and reflect and be less rigid, right? To show that it's not all formulaic. If it is formulaic, it's not a formula that works, right? So what can we do?
There's also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Andy.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say there also is like, so there's a form of mental practice that you can do using call recordings that is just at the disposal of all sales leaders that we do in the practice lab, but that I don't think a lot of people really think about. Traditionally with call recording coaching, you're using a recorded call to kind of point backwards at the things that a rep could have done better, at that time. But one of the things that we really encourage, and this is where actually the peer group can be so powerful, is to, let's say, take a discovery call, right? And rather than using it to point backwards at the areas that the seller could have improved, use it to collectively kind of stop and start the tape. And when the prospect stops talking, stop the tape and say, all right, what are you all curious about? Or where would you take this conversation next, right? And it allows everybody in attendance to put themselves in the shoes of that seller, whoever it is, regardless of how well the call went, to start to think through the moves. And it's so fun too, because oftentimes you'll get sellers, let's say who've been in some training since that call, or who've done some practice since that call, looking back at their past selves with the knowledge they now have, realizing they now make different choices. And then when we start the tape, we get to see, well, what choice did that seller make? So call recordings can be a really, really valuable tool for mental group practice, like you're talking about.
Yeah, and so just a question about, you touched on this a little bit, Andy, about, what people are measuring right now, right? Is it number of calls? Is it this? Is it that? So these essentially human skills that we're talking about, how do you measure that? How do you measure that?
It's a great question. I'm not sure you can necessarily. I mean, what you do is you measure an aggregate. Yeah, for me as a seller and as a sales leader, there's just one metric that was really important, and that's your win rate. Because that is the buyer's ultimate referendum on you as a seller in terms of how well you've helped them get their job done. And yeah, I'm not sure that, we could come up with metrics for curiosity and so on. But again, I think those have become more coaching points, sort of as Jordana was talking about, as you're listening to recordings, you're listening to what's happened. But it's really, are you getting your job done, right? And this is really sort of a shortcoming that exists increasingly in sales is, we have the benefit of all this technology and we're using it. But what we've seen sales performance degrade over the last 10 to 15 years in terms of percentage of reps hitting quota, in terms of win rates across the board. The study that came out early this year in a book, a study of 5,500 companies around the world, B2B companies, average win rate on deals of 100K and higher, and 100K is a fairly modest sized deal, 17%, meaning that we're in a situation where in the B2B sales world, where the average seller is only able to close fewer than 1 out of every 5 of the most qualified opportunities. And that just points to a tremendous disconnect between the buyer and the seller in terms of being able to connect with them at a human level, build that emotional connection, build the credibility and trust you need in order to have them open up, as Jordana talked about before, and give you the answers that you need to the questions that so you can help them better define the problems and better define the outcomes they can achieve. Yeah, we've got a lot of work in front of us. And unfortunately, I said we're sort of heading the wrong direction. So that's why I'm encouraged by, what Jordana's doing, for instance, is how do we make this more tangible for sellers and put them in a position where they can be more in the moment with buyers and less sort of constrained by the script and more focused on the person they're talking with, and ask the questions that need to be asked. Because our job as sellers, as I said, is to listen to our buyers. Is we're doing that to help the buyer define their challenges, help the buyer better understand their challenges and better understand the outcomes they can achieve. We do that not by throwing facts at them. We do it by asking questions.
I think too, just this is how I felt when I started out selling, but like I thought that selling was something different than being, right? In a way, and I thought that I needed to be somebody else or sound differently in order to sell effectively. And I saw a question in the chat, this great question, like, can curiosity be trained? And it's like every human being is born curious
with the same amount of curiosity.
With this same amount of curiosity. The thing is that humans, sellers often forget that all of that great stuff that makes them who they are belongs in their selling. They don't give themselves permission to let themselves in or to introduce the qualities that make them a human being with friends and family in their selling.
Exactly.
But for me, the biggest shift was when we got a sales leader early on in our sales team who recognized the massive gap between who I was 2 minutes before I picked up the phone and like the stiff British person that for some reason that I sounded on the phone talking to galleries. We were selling to galleries. So I thought I had to be very, very stuffy. And he just gave me permission to drop the mask and help me to understand that all of who I was is exactly what belonged to my conversation with prospect and who belonged to my conversation with prospect. And all of a sudden it was like, I soared.
Right. Well,
So
go ahead.
Well,
I was going to say, I think to the point that was raised in the question by Ken was we train curiosity out of people.
Well, exactly.
That's the irony, right? And it starts early in life. And this is not, purely relegated to sales. There's been studies about this that, take the example. How often have you been, and maybe it's just me, but a parent or a teacher, somebody says, "Oh my God, enough of the questions. Just do what you're told."
Yeah.
And how many times do people have to be told that, especially when they're younger, and to be sort of told that people that have, are curious and have a lot of questions are disruptive and they're troublemakers.
Yeah.
And you see that in sales training as well. Here are the questions we ask. Why are you asking that question? Why aren't you asking this question? Stick to the script. This is what we do. This process works, which, clearly the process doesn't work because our win rates are so low across the board. But the point being is that we're actively discouraging people from being curious. And maybe unintentionally, but that's the net effect of what's happening. So I love the point that Jordana said is she had a manager, gave her permission to be curious. And that's what sales leaders need to be doing is not saying, insist that this is the way we do it, but hey, be yourself out there.
Yeah. And I tell my team this all the time too, is, people like to talk about themselves. They like people who are interested in them. And if you're following a script, like you said it before, you can see it from a mile away and that they're not actually listening to what you're saying. They're thinking about the next question that they have on their laundry list. And so I love that, the permission to be curious, because people can feel that.
Yeah, I have a quote in my book that I love from the late great Clayton Christensen, who said that questions are places in your brain where answers fit. If you don't ask the questions, there's no place for the answers to go.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And, just going back to kind of practicing, teaching, learning, coaching, all of those things, you can do that in a variety of ways and with a variety of people, right? So where do you think is there equal value in coaching, learning with your manager versus your peers versus a stranger, like, maybe in your lab, Jordana, where you might have two people who don't even know each other kind of working together? Should there be more value placed on one versus the other? Are they equal? Or an actual buyer, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of thoughts that I have on that, depending on the context. But what I'll say is that I've often found that when all coaching, learning, knowledge sharing on a sales team is supposed to come from one source and one source only, the sales leader, that becomes a giant bottleneck.
Exactly.
Because the sales leader thinks, I've got so much to do. I have 10 reports. How am I supposed to find the time to fill in the blank, coach, train, practice, whatever? The most kind of generative, high performing fun and rewarding teams I've ever been a part of have been ones where the sales leader has encouraged a culture of practice and peer coaching, and where sellers take it upon themselves to pair up, to try things on for size, to offer each other feedback, to listen to each other's calls. Because when you create a culture like that, oftentimes that's a high indication of psychological safety, because people feel comfortable trying new things and making mistakes and asking for help and not hiding their vulnerability. But it removes the tremendous pressure on already spread thin sales leaders. Though I agree, Andy, it's kind of like, if you're not coaching, what are you doing? But sales leaders tell me it's hard for them to find the time. It removes that pressure and spreads the weight around, so that more practice, more coaching, more feedback, asking for and giving is happening. And as a result, more growth, more fun, more play and experimentation is happening too. That's what I
Well, but I think to your point, though, I would extend is yes, the sales manager often has the bottleneck because there's this presumption that, all knowledge would flow through them.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't have it. I mean, I was promoted to sales manager after 18 months in sales, leading a group of 12 sellers. It's like, what did I know about sales, right? I mean, 18 months, I knew nothing. And so, there was sort of single thread, or have this idea that we're going to single thread knowledge through a sales manager to help people grow is ridiculous. And so it has to be multiple sources, multiple influences, because as we go through our careers, we become the sum total of all the influences, right? That they've been exposed to, whether it's through training or practice or learning on your own, reading a book or talking to, dealing with your customers, learning through experience. All those help develop us. So they all need to be present. Yeah. So to expect that sellers are going to learn primarily from their frontline manager, who's a huge influence, but have a very limited source of knowledge themselves about selling, or people in enablement, they have a great role to play. But again, they too are limited. Is we need to say, how do we encourage our sellers to learn throughout their career from multiple sources and incorporate all that into what they're doing? And that then becomes the challenge. It's not just a culture of practice, but a culture of learning.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And we kind of pride ourselves on that at Bongo too, is putting as much value on peer learning as learning from your manager, right? And so there's a ton of opportunities for peers to watch each other's videos and not only participate, but watch other groups conversations and just really have an ongoing group just collaboration. Just collaboration is so important now, especially with how many people are remote now. You used to be able to get people in a room together. That's just out the window in today's day. So so
what's also amazing, Emily, I was just going to say, what's also so amazing is that when you give your sellers as a sales leader permission to help and support one another, what often emerges are the sellers who get most excited about empowering, enabling their peers. I mean, that was me. It was because my sales leader gave me permission to start to give feedback and start to do my own coaching that I really found, in a way, my calling in a sense around empowering and enabling other people. And I got way more excited about the wins that I was able to support than I did my own sales wins. And then from there, you get your next frontline managers, because there's often a real misnomer in our industry thinking that the top performers are going to be the best managers, but that's just unequivocally untrue if they lack that real fire for lighting fires in other people. So that can be a really, really powerful way to kind of organically grow your next really great level of managers.
It's a fantastic point. Absolutely. I was going to make that point. How do you find your best managers? Those who are doing it already, right? And so if they are already doing the coaching, if they're already engaged in that activity, then you say, these are the people who have the potential to become great leaders, not the number one performer.
Right.
We have about 15 minutes left. I don't know, Jennifer, if there's been any questions that have come through.
Well, there's one here.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, there's one here from Ethan. What advice you give to talk about my backstory, starting off as more introverted? What advice would you give to a similar person starting off an SDR role, was currently given the role prospecting and not seeing the value of sending out impersonal LinkedIn messages?
Stop sending them.
It's a great question, right? Because again, we have to have sort of this assumption built into the way we sell that increasingly, again, is that volume is always the answer, right? As opposed to, well, what can we do that's a little different? For me yeah, my career started well before the internet. But we went out and made 30, 40 cold calls a day in the field. So knocking on doors, so selling, large, medium-sized computer systems at the time. And for me, I hated that personally. And so, I took a different tack from what everybody else in the office was doing. And I developed we didn't have mail lists in those days, but I'd go through a business directory, and I was selling to the construction industry. And I would hold a weekly seminar in my branch office where I would demonstrate this computer system design for construction job cost accounting. And I'd invite 10 to 15 contractors every week, send postcards out, physical postcards. Then I'd follow up like mad. And if I could get 5 people in a week, I knew I was going to get 2 prospects. And gosh, after doing that for a couple months, I wasn't cold calling anymore, at least not in the conventional way. Now, no one else was doing that, right? But it was working for me. Other methods were working for other people. It gets back to this point, is you have to take control of your own career. And you have to be willing to experiment, take some risks, have some tough conversations with bosses. If you think there's a better way that you can engage, maybe it is using LinkedIn, maybe it is a different way of preparing, maybe it is, holding small, events. Try some, see what works, because we try to put everybody into these molds that say, yeah, the answer is making X number of dials or sending X number of emails and generating X number of calls. Quite honestly, when you look at the final numbers in terms of win rates, you can make the argument that those methods aren't really working. So there's room for different approaches. And so experiment.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many emails I get every day there's just so much noise out there. So
well, we've built up this culture in B2B sales, especially in the SaaS world, but it's not exclusive to the SaaS world by any means, that there's only one way to sell, and there's only one way to develop prospects. And having developed prospects, there's only one way to sell them and close them. And again, I'll go back to the numbers, 17% win rates. That's not success. Doesn't mean there aren't companies that can grow. A few companies can grow with those win rates, but it's generally a failure, because as a seller, your goal should be, I win more than I lose. That's the bottom line. And if you're not able to achieve that, then in my mind, that's highly problematic, and there's tremendous room for improvement. But it requires a little bit of a mindset shift, starting at the top, oftentimes in organizations. And we need to have a different set of goals, oftentimes for enablement, than really are out there, because the goal shouldn't just be to train. The goal should be that our people are productive at a high level across the board.
I was also just going to say too, and this is kind of separate from practice, more along the lines of the human element, but like in your prospecting, don't forget to have fun and to give your prospect a fun experience, an unexpected or a surprising or a joyful experience being prospected by you. I mean, I do cold outreach for the practice lab now, and I am so light. I am so silly. I am so playful. My co-founder, Jonathan, landed a meeting with a big CEO because he made a LinkedIn video holding a machete, referencing something that the CEO had posted about on LinkedIn. And we booked the meeting in 20 minutes. So I think there is just so much potential for people to give themselves permission to play and experiment in service of creating a more joyful and playful experience for the buyer as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're having fun, they're going to have fun.
100%.
Right? I mean, I was thinking about this. I don't know if this probably predates both of you, but there was this ad campaign years ago in California about, it was the California dairy producers, and the whole thing was about happy cows produce better cheese. And I was just thinking, for some reason that struck me this week. It's like, well, yeah, happy sellers produce better results, right? If you're happy, if there's an element of joy in what you do. To your point, specifically, Jordana is I published a post several years ago based on an interview from Steve Carr's, coach of the Golden State Warriors. And they have these sort of I forget the three attributes they've really focused on, or values they work on, is compassion, competition, and joy. Right? Here is a professional basketball team, they're highly paid, but joy is central to their ability to perform at the levels they perform. So yeah, why not enjoy what you're doing? Why not do it in a way that, again, aligns with who you are as a human being? And when people say, well, I'm working for a boss that doesn't really do that or isn't supportive of that, then find the situation and find a boss that will.
Mhm.
It's a big world out there. You're not handcuffed to any one situation. You know, people do change jobs. Your ability to succeed, you can, and Jordana's, what she does, a perfect example of this is based on the situation you find yourself in. You know, do you have a boss that values practice, right? That is there to support and develop you? If not, go find one who is.
They're out there.
They're out there. And we need more of them, but they are out there. And yeah, just don't be stuck where you are. I mean, it's people that are doing it the right way. Go find someone who's doing it the right way. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, as a seller, I always took the approach. I was hiring a boss. I wasn't going to work for a new company. When I was looking for a new job, I was hiring a boss who was going to help me achieve what I wanted to achieve in my life.
Yeah. And tactically speaking, if you're wondering like, well, how do I start having fun when I prospect? Literally just smile when you're writing your prospecting emails. That's what I do. I attach some smiling energy to my prospecting emails. The words come out warmer and they're better received. Jonathan, my co-founder, in between his prospecting emails, will often just take a beat of gratitude, literally, and think about something he's grateful for and send them off.
Yep.
Energy is real, folks, right? And if selling is supposed to
Absolutely.
be a transfer of enthusiasm, and energy, you can do that even via email, even via LinkedIn voice DM and video.
Exactly.
No, Lexi, it wasn't just you. Yeah.
Yeah. We get that feedback sometimes. Why do we have to put ourselves on video if we're just practicing, right? And maybe I'm just calling someone on the phone. They're not going to see me, right? So why do I have to? And we say the exact same thing. You see yourself, if you can see yourself or someone else could see you, you could feel that, right? And so it helps to watch yourself or watch your colleague, because whoever is on the other end of that phone, they know if you're nervous, if you're frowning, if you're, in a bad mood. Even if they can't see you, they can feel that energy. So I love that, Jordana.
I think they say only 7% of communication are the words we use, or is the word is the words we use, right? Yeah. Everything else is nonverbal. So we can use that to our advantage. Yeah.
All right. So Jennifer, I don't know if you want to flip back to the deck for a second so we can wrap this up. But Jordana, Andy, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, to talk about this. And we've talked about that gloomy statistic of what was it, 17%, Andy. So I think we all have room to grow, and we'll take any opportunity to do that. And so right here, you'll see that, if you do want that opportunity to practice on your own time, I mentioned at Bongo, we're all about kind of practicing judgment-free zone. So if you take a picture of this QR code, you can access a free sales practice course with Bongo, and you'll see when you go in, you can practice, you'll get real-time feedback on how to improve. And we're all about, improving and developing that confidence. So I really hope that you take advantage of that. And then Jennifer, was there anything else, or was that the last slide? I can't remember. No, just thank you. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Jordana, Andy. Always great to talk to both of you. And
thank you for having us.
We'll be following up with the recording and some additional information, but look forward to hearing from whoever wants to reach out.
Connect with us on LinkedIn too. All right.
Yeah,
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye now.